welcome to the IAS's 10th anniversary. You get major credit for being here when the sun is out and it's the Thursday before spring break. But we're very glad to have you here. And I just want to make a couple of announcements before I get to the good stuff, which is our panel. So next week is spring break. There will be no Thursdays at 4. Just in case, don't come to Crosby Seminar Room next Thursday at 4. We do want you to come back, however, on Thursday, March 24th, which is, but we will be upstairs in the Best Buy Theater. And this is a one of our joint programs with Northrop, celebrating the Mark Morris Dance Group, which is performing on March 30th. So our program is March 24th, upstairs in the Best Buy Theater. Theirs will be on the main stage March 30th. Go buy your tickets on your way out of the building. But at any rate, it's a conversation on love versus duty. Morris's Dido and Aeneas, and Provost Hansen, Kelly Harness, Nita Crevens, and Sonia Kuftinek will be in conversation about this story and about the Mark Morris Dance Group. Okay, Northern Spark. Some of you may remember the Northern Spark Arts Festival, which has been held twice here in Northrop. It's all night in the middle of June, a second Saturday. It won't be in Northrop this year, it'll be at the Mill City Museum. However, there is still an important role for university community members, and I just want to invoke the spirit of Professor Rich Lee's karaoke presentation of his research. But the former faculty filibuster, no longer named that, but essentially still exists. So don't miss out on your chance to present your research. This time it's a little shorter. You don't have an hour to do karaoke. You deliver a 5-minute presentation of your work with or without slides, tools, assistants, props, or whatever, and then engage in a 10-minute response and conversation with a community artist. There are slots available starting at 9 p.m. Saturday night, June 11th, running through 5 a.m. dawn on Sunday morning, June 12th. And Christina, standing right here, will be happy to tell you how to sign up. Is there a sign-up sheet on the table? There will be.
And if you are coming to our lovely reception after this, which I hope you all do, it's going to be some food and wine, you will also be able to sign up at that point. So you can think about it a little bit. And it's not written in stone, we'll email you more information, but we will definitely take it as a promise. So just
And you don't have to be faculty.
Yes.
That's right.
Anyone can do that.
Anyone can do it. Okay. So following the panel discussion, which we will try to end a little bit early at 5:15 so we can get a second of sunshine as we walk over to Nolte, I'd like to invite all of you to join us for a reception and anniversary celebration. I believe there will be at least one parlor game over in our former space in the lounge and library on the first floor of Nolte, just on the other side of Pillsbury Hall. And people will be around to help you find it if you can't otherwise find it. You may have noticed that this semester we're not videotaping the question and answer period. We are going to tape it today, but we won't turn the camera on the audience. All right, so now to the main event. Oh, and what I forgot to tell you was that cool video that you were watching as you came in was put together by Aaron, Victor, and Vangarud, which from clips of IAS presentations and interviews of people talking about the IAS. That will also be running constantly at the celebration in Nolte. So I invite you to come see your friends and yourselves in some cases. Okay, so in spring 2014, the IAS moved here into Nolte. Into Northrop. They both start with N-O. Okay, let me start over. In spring of 2014, the IAS moved into Northrop. And we had really a blast of a party honoring Ann Waltner, who is the IAS's founding director. That's not the same as being a foundling. And it was a party that I think is very hard to top. So today we decided instead to do a reflection that's sort of more forward-looking and thinking about how the IAS's past 10 years can inform our future directions, and particularly in responding to the grand challenges and principles laid out in the university's strategic plan. How can we best serve and develop the whole spectrum of research at the university and respond to critical issues and concerns? So we asked 5 people with a lot of experience. They're people who have strong connections to the IAS as fellows, collaborative conveners, and board members. And they're going to tackle this from the lens of their own experience and concerns moving forward. So the introduction I'm about to give won't do them full justice, but we want to save time for the discussion and brainstorming session that involves all of you. So the panelist presentations will also be very short. And I'm going to introduce them in the order that they're presenting. So Heidi Barajas, on this end, is Associate Professor of Organizational Leadership, Policy, and Development, and the Director of the Robert J. Jones Urban Research and Outreach Engagement Center in North Minneapolis, but it's a University of Minnesota center. Her research, teaching, and public service have centered on issues related to access and equity, with a focus on building educational institutions that support students across differences of race, class, and gender. She has been a collaborative convener and is a current IAS board member. And I just want to call your attention to a photography exhibit that is one result of the Commercial Sex Research and Action Collaborative that Heidi was a convener for. The exhibit is titled When Places Speak. It was curated by Tasula Hajiani, and it's on exhibit through May 8th in the Goldstein Museum of Design Gallery over on the St. Paul campus in McNeil Hall. David Beard, in the middle here, is an Associate Professor of Writing Studies at the University of Minnesota Duluth. His research explores the history, theory, and pedagogy of rhetoric as an interdisciplinary formation. He's been a convener or participant in at least 2 collaboratives, including the current Fused Realities, Theorizing the Anthropocene Across Identity, Political Economy, and Environment. He has also been an IAS board member and was sort of my introduction to what it means to have meaningful board members who think carefully about the issues and advise. So Christine Baumler, down on the far end, is Associate Professor and Director of Graduate Studies in Art. Her work seeks to raise awareness about ecological issues through studio practice, as well as engaging communities in environmental projects focused on ecological restoration. She's won numerous awards, including a McKnight Artist Fellowship Award, and she's been a convener on at least 3 IAS collaboratives, including the one that I have to say is my favorite title, although I was not aware of this collaborative at the time, Mapping Spectral Traces. Kyung-Soo Yu, on this end, is Associate Professor of Soil, Water, and Climate in the College of Food, Agricultural, and Natural Sciences, and his research seeks to quantitatively integrate the interactions among rocks, minerals, and organic matter in motion, and to use this understanding to define and resolve fundamental questions in the evolution of landscapes and regional to global biogeochemical cycles. So unfortunately for him, his work involves earthworms, which basically means that's our shorthand for Kyung-Soo. He's the earthworm god. But he is also the most recent fellow on this panel. He was here last fall, and he serves as the inspiration for the new IAS stock joke that begins, a historian, geographer, and soil scientist go into a bar. And he'll talk about what comes out. So Erica Lee, next to David, is Director of the Immigration History Research Center here at the university and the Rudolph J. Vicoli Professor of Immigration History. Her scholarly specialties include migration, race, and ethnicity, and immigration law and public policy. And I'll just tell you that her most recent blockbuster of a book, The Making of Asian America a History came out with Simon & Schuster in 2015 and has been reviewed favorably in places like the New York Times, the New Yorker, Kirkus Reviews, etc. Evelyn, last but not least, Evelyn David Heiser is our moderator today, and she's the director of the Institute for Global Studies and Assistant Dean for International Programs in the College of Liberal Arts at the University of Minnesota. She works with faculty and students to create an environment for interdisciplinary investigation of significant global issues, so you can see why it would be natural for her to hang out at the IAS. And creating sustainable partnerships addressing these issues. Her area of interest focuses on Russian political economy and democratization, and I think of all the people at the table, Evelyn probably has the longest standing relationship with the IAS. I feel like she's kind of the long-standing advisor and friend from whom I think both Anne and I have benefited. So without further ado, Heidi, I'll let you go first.
Great. Oh, and look at your slides, that's awesome. So good afternoon, everyone. I just want to get right to the crux of it, and that is the issue of, in my experience, what is sort of the relationship with IAS in terms of supporting grand challenges. So let me say, first of all, I'm always glad to see so many students here, no offense, everyone. Because I know that the last two sort of generations of students that I've seen come to the University of Minnesota have great concern over public good. And so the idea that we want to take on grand challenges has significant meaning for students, and we need to help the rest of the university understand how significant those meanings are. I think that the IAS collaboration projects that I worked on with my colleagues, anybody like me yelling? Sorry. That I worked on with my colleagues, the impact of sex trafficking and trading on communities is indeed, falls easily in two buckets of the grand challenges. One is to ensure a just and equitable society, because if your option is to be in sex trafficking and trading, those are not equitable options. And the other is about fostering human potential and well-being. And it's not a way, I think, that people often come at a topic like this, but that is indeed the way that we look at it, particularly through UROC. The IAS team I worked with was an incredibly interesting group of people, all of who approached this issue from a different lens. I'll be honest with you, we actually asked for a really big extension when we did our collaboration, because it took us a really long time to figure out that nobody was asking us to actually have a product. People were asking us to engage in a conversation about our topic area. And faculty are not very often given the space to do that. So that was the first thing that we learned. Once we learned that talking was important, you have to understand that the nature of the urban research and outreach engagements that I work at is about engaging in partnership with communities. And so even applying for an IAS, it was a test for us to say, is engagement important? Well, of course, IAS came back because they are who they are, saying yes, engaging with communities, not just because of grand challenges and that approach, but because that is what we do. As an academic institution, we actually engage with all kinds of organizations, peoples, ideas, thinking. And so UROC coming and saying, how about community partnership? It was a no-brainer. But it was a test for us. We actually didn't know. Here are the group of people that we work with, and you can see the different areas that they came from. And there they are again. These are the areas: women's studies, homeless youth, policy, design and space, role of anchor institutions, and the idea of mapping the market on sex trafficking and trading. Those were the different sort of foundations that this group of faculty came together to talk about sex trafficking and trading. And the goal of it was really to say, what's the disconnect? What's the gap between how academics talk about this issue and how community talks about this issue? So we engaged with policymakers, lawmakers, but particularly victims of sex trafficking and trading to really help us understand how do we fill in that liminal space in the middle. Not all community, not all university, but actually what is the space that both of us come together to talk about this? Liminal is not my word, that's Lauren Martin's word, I got to hear it wrong. One of the ways we did this was to have a symposium where we brought these people, came and talked about the dominant narratives, what are the impacts of having dominant narratives around the idea of sex trafficking and trading.
And I can say this very easily. 5 years ago, I had trouble saying this out loud. We've now been doing 5 and 6 years worth of research that has really impacted policy in the state of Minnesota around sex trafficking and trading. And again, what I want to say, the focus on this, and we were really influenced because of our time with this collaborative around saying this isn't just about individual bad choices or bad parts of the neighborhood or bad families or bad people. This is about how communities work. And that was really important in terms of us understanding how do we then approach that question. That's a picture of the practice. I'm really glad that Jennifer brought up one of the outcomes of this, which we did not know about, and it actually required some additional funding, was working with Tasula in design. And we were like, why would a design person be interested in this idea of sex trafficking and trading? Because she was interested in the space that it occupies. I hope some of you actually have a moment before the 1st of May to go see this exhibit. It's incredible. There are statistics and some research around sex trafficking and trading, but let me tell you, these photos speak to you. The artists who did the photos were remarkable. We did a trial run of it at UROC. UROC has a gallery space where we actually have exhibitions for about 3 months. This was a one-night exhibition because of the topic and because we have a lot of families come through. We have a lot of different constituents who come through. But then what was interesting about it is that this gave us the time to really actually working with design, who not all of them understood why would we engage with community around this stuff? Why is this topic important for people in design? That they actually decided to have this exhibition at the Goldstein was a remarkable sort of transition around understanding how a partnership like this raises up a topic that most people wouldn't talk about. The other outcome of this collaborative, by the way, is that there was a digital story created around 4 different narratives around sex trafficking and sex trading. Again, so I forgot to tell you one thing. This is not my work. My investment was, what does a topic like this have to do with how university people respond to a community? That was the role that I came to this play. The second role, or I should say, way that we took advantage of this collaboration that IAS provided for us, was UROC figuring out how do we create spaces that attract faculty over time when it isn't about them actually getting money. Even if there's project money, it's not about that. And what does it mean to create a space for a cohort of people coming from all of these different places to talk about a particular thing? This model has been groundbreaking for us in terms of the models we're developing to work with faculty in the university. As IAS is a mechanism for really helping us create ways that faculty work across disciplines in particular areas and relate to the grand challenges, that's what UROC does on a community partnership level. We now have 2 other partnerships that we're working right now because of what we learned, and here's what we learned about faculty. They will come if they have a passion for the topic, and you have a way to logistically sustain them continuing to meet. They eventually will find funding if they find common ground and it's something that they want to do. But it can't fall outside of their area or be an addition to what they do. It has to actually be something that they're either already doing or they planned on doing. This was key information for us, and I'm telling you all this, you're probably going, why are you telling us this? Because I think it applies to more than just faculty. Anytime you look at having something like an IAS that puts resources and people and administration behind gathering people around the idea of ideas, it's important to understand what's the carrot. What is it that feed all of us to continue to come back and do this? So I guess what I would say the end of my 5 minutes would be, for me, this was such an opportunity for us to learn. It's been a great opportunity for us to understand further how IAS and public engagement sort of cross what they do. And I think it actually is one of the real answers about how do we logistically figure out the grand challenges actually have something happening.
there, just hit the next slide.
Just hit the next slide?
Yeah.
Oh. Hey,
He did the pool.
cool. Just like that. Okay, hi, so I'm David. I'm from the Duluth campus. 3 times I was the convener of collaboratives across 3 campuses, once hosted in Duluth, once hosted in the Twin Cities, and once hosted in Crookston with my friend Mark. Everybody wave at Mark. He's awesome. Those collaboratives eventually became an interdisciplinary graduate group funded by the Graduate School, which became one of 3 genuinely inter-campus minors that exists in the catalogs as of this year on both campuses, the Twin Cities and the Duluth campus, and additionally I've served as a board member. So I've been part of this for a long time and lucky to be so. Duluth has its own kind of grand challenges lately, and I thought it might be worth talking about those. There is a $4.3 million, depending on who you talk to, structural deficit facing our university. There's the possibility of merging 5 colleges into 3 emerging departments, but no department have fewer than 15 full-time faculty, which seems frightening to me, but then I remember that, Mark, you've been teaching in a Department of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences for as long as you've been teaching, basically. And so it's simply something different, not something necessarily bad. But it is one of the challenges that faces us. And so one of the suggestions that came across, I participated in a research committee on the Duluth campus. One of the suggestions came up is we should participate in this grand challenges thing as a way to lure some funding up to Duluth to maintain us. In this unusual time, and some of the funding streams are earmarked for the Twin Cities campus, as I understand it, which is to say that many programs like the IAS, the grant and aid, are available to people across the system, not all of the grand challenges opportunities were. And so we sat down in a room and tried to, over the course of 2 meetings, determine whether does Duluth have its own grand challenges and might they be fundable? What can we bring to the table as a campus? It was an interesting set of meetings over about 3 weeks with people from the Natural Resources Research Institute, a representation of 5 colleges, members of Sea Grant, a whole bunch of different folks coming together to ask, well, what can Duluth bring to this table? And this is the list we came up with. Forestry, mining and mineral resources, water, the largest freshwater lake in the world, and transportation engineering. The first 3 are the inherent mission of the Natural Resources Research Institute, which makes a certain kind of sense. The 4th one is basically the moving of those things around, if I can put it that way, right? And I went home and I thought about it for a long time, and at the next meeting I came back and said, there are no people on this list, right? There's not a single reference to people, to culture, language, or human creativity on that list. And that felt a little awkward, right? And so we came back the next week and we said, okay, well, what is uniquely strong at our campus that can help us bring people back into the mix? And the eventual topic we decided upon was indigeneity, right? The notion that we are surrounded by tribes on all sides. And the study of native language, culture, and people, and indigeneity as a kind of broader topic is really something that our campus can do in ways that perhaps other campuses can't. But this whole process of trying to work through what Duluth can bring to the grand challenges conversation reminded me of what's important about the IAS, right? Because the conversation went a certain kind of way, and then it turned because of the nature of the people at the table, if that makes sense. Because there was someone from American Indian Studies at the table, because I was at the table, it was able to transform slightly. And it makes me think a little bit as we follow the funding and how funding pressures push us to research in a certain direction or push us into different forms of departmental organization. Will the construction of polyglot departments encourage interdisciplinary work, or will it balkanize us? And that's something I'm actually hoping to talk with Mark about at conversation later, right? Well, if you find yourself in a department of something and something and something, what does that do to the way you approach your own work? Do you tighten your boundaries or do you loosen them? And will the construction of the Duluth contribution of the grand challenges better connect us, or will it mark us as different? That's another interesting question that I'm thinking through. In order to think through these questions, in my own head I've been reading a lot of Thomas Merton lately. And so I'm going to read a little bit here, and then I'm going to ask my friends Mark and Suzanne if they'll read the next bit for me. Because you're nice people and will you learn it? Okay. So the part I'm going to read is this bit about how there's a mental ecology too, a living balance of spirits in this corner of the woods. He's referring to the woods that he's retreated to. He's a monk. There is room here for many other songs besides those of birds, of Vallejo, for instance, or Zukowski, Ungaretti, Edwin Muir. Here is also Zhuangzi, whose climate is perhaps the most the climate of this silent corner of the woods, a climate in which there is no need for explanations. Here is the reassuring companionship of many silent zoos and foos, Kungzu, Laozu, Mengzu, Tufu, and Huineng, and Chao Chu, and the scroll from Suzuki. Kemu, here is her graceful Philoxenus. Here should be in our feminine voices from Angela Foligno to Flannery O'Connor, Teresa Lavilla, Juliana Garwich, and more. That kind of interdisciplinary space that he's creating in the woods for himself because he's bringing his books feels to me like the interdisciplinary spaces the IAS creates. But there's a small bit of resistance in Merton's thinking about this too. And Susanna, would you be willing to be the inquisitive person? And Mark, the italicized text is a monk who's getting increasingly irritated.
So, all right, so am I moving?
Are you mad at people?
Okay, are you mad at people?
No,
Are you mad at the monastery?
no.
Why do you live in the woods?
You have to live somewhere.
Do you get lonely?
I don't think about it.
Is it true that your bad back is due to yoga?
No.
Is it true that you are practicing Zen in secret?
Pardon me. I don't speak English.
And there's something about that quiet moment of resistance, the I don't speak English, which speaks to me of the kind of space the IAS creates for a scholar to say, wait a minute, I just decided not to answer these persistent questions and to think for a moment. And I think that's the space the IAS gives to us. And so I'll stop there.
Thank you. That's a hard act to follow. Participation, that's great. So I'm Christine Baumler, and I teach in the art department. And you see there that I am in the interdisciplinary art and social engagement area. That is actually a new area as of this year. I was hired to teach in the drawing and painting area. So amongst the many things that I think the IAS gets credit for shifting is actually the structure of the art department. What I'd like to talk to you about today is really just a really brief overview of the 5 collaboratives I've actually been co-convening over the past 10 years. Yeah, you need 2 more. And even previous to those, I was first introduced to the work of the IAS through the Space and Place Collaborative that was co-convened by Sonia Kuftanik and Karen Till. So they were the first ones to introduce me into this. But this is going to sound more like a testimonial, I think, rather than I'll get around to the grand challenges. But I just can't overstate the impact that the IAS has had on my teaching and research at the University of Minnesota and within the Twin Cities community. And in terms of the 5 collaboratives I've been involved with, it's resulted in 3 art exhibitions, 2 at the Nash Gallery and 1 at Form Plus Content Gallery. We've had 3 well-attended symposia, the creation of an international network of artists called Mapping Spectral Traces, which includes people from the UK, Scotland, Ireland, and Australia. An interdisciplinary class called Art and Social Engagement. It's also provided or leveraged funds for public lectures, workshops, and by national and international artists. And then finally, as I mentioned, I really do credit the IAS with having us rethink how we structure the department that I'm in. These are a lot of questions, but what I've really been thinking about and grappling with over the past 10 years is what role does art play in these grand challenges? And there's this really beautiful list of questions that was actually in an article in the Brooklyn Rail just on the eve of the Climate Change Summit. And I'm just going to highlight a few of these questions, though I think they're all really valuable, but ones that we've been thinking about in relationship to the grand challenges. One is, can art provide aesthetic, emotional, and beautiful experience while empowering direct environmental action and policy change? Can beauty infiltrate and influence public opinion? What audience should it reach? And can art tear down cultural, racial, and economic boundaries? So these are big questions that we all address as members of society, but we're really, as artists and as people working across disciplines, really trying to grapple with. So I'm going to just show you a really brief outline. I'm not going to talk about all these, but there's a really wonderful site that I discovered on IAS where I could go back and remember what we actually did. So if you just go on the IAS site, you can read paragraphs about everyone's collaborations here. But 2006, 2007, this was Art, Design, and Social Engagement, co-convened with Christine Miller at Landscape Architecture, and that resulted in a couple of classes that we actually taught under the radar between Sonia Kuftanik, Karen Till, and Christine Miller. So we actually set up our classes to convene at the same time in the same room. Now I'm happy to say with the Grand Challenges curriculum, I'm officially teaching a class with 2 scientists that we actually don't have to do secretly. Before I skip ahead, 2008, 2009, Rethinking Statehood, Sovereignty, Memory, Citizenship in Minnesota 150, so to commemorate the sesquicentennial of the Dakota conflict. And that was really important in terms of thinking about this place as Dakota homeland and situating ourselves culturally, really honoring the past and thinking about how that impacts the present and the future. Mapping spectral traces, which was mentioned, and Pat Nunley is here in the back, who's part of that collaborative. And it started as a collaborative, but actually it has gone on to generate this international collaboration. And also, Mona Smith, who was part of this collaborative, has started a local collaborative called the Healing Place Collaborative, which also Pat Nunley and Rebecca Krinke are involved with. And it really asks the question, what happens when we put the indigenous first? And so that really frames everything we do through that collaborative. And then I would not recommend this to anyone, but 2014, 2015, I did 2 collaboratives at once. Where's Nature Now with Matt Tucker, also in landscape architecture, and we did a symposium called Nature 3.x. And then finally, Engage Art in the Social Sphere, which was a collaboration between people at the Walker, across the campus, and it was a 4-month exhibition of programming that was about social change. The show was called Thinking, Making, Living. I'm just going to very quickly just show you a few images from these collaboratives. This is Mapping Spectral Traces. We actually went down to the site of the Bedote, which is at Fort Snelling, the site of the concentration camp. And Mona Smith led a ceremony down there. We had this exhibition, again, bringing in national and international artists. It was called Shadows, Traces, Undercurrents, and it really talked about unacknowledged histories of place. This was the Thinking, Making, Living exhibition. This was an edible insect tasting and what kind of future we have for our diet as we face things like climate change. And then finally, the Headwaters in the Anthropocene workshop with very famous artist Buster Simpson, who worked with students here at Landscape Architecture to think about how do we view our world in this age of the Anthropocene. This is Matt Tucker, part of the conference. He really led most of this conference, Where is Nature Now? And then I'm just going to end on this slide, which is the next grand challenge that I think all the collaboratives that I've worked on have really led to thinking about climate change and how do we develop sustainable cities and resilient communities in a world of change, but informed by different cultural and disciplinary voices. Thank you.
Okay, I'm Kyung-soo Yu. I'm from the Department of Soil, Water and Climate in St. Paul campus. And I'm also a scientist, so I study dirt. And I like studying soils as a part of terrestrial ecosystems. And I don't precisely remember when I became aware of IAS, but I think it was through one of their announcement on the funding opportunities. So I looked at their IAS website and browsed through. And I noticed that the IAS has huge focus on collaborative, interdisciplinary research. Also, my first impression was that the institute was focusing on humanities and art. So I had a hard time kind of connecting my work to IAS. But over the years, I have become increasingly interested in the negative impacts that exotic earthworms have on the forest in the Great Lakes area. If I give you a little bit of background, and much part of North America was under the ice until about 10,000 years ago. So then climate warmed up and the ice retreated and the forest reoccupied the lands. But the earthworms, they are terribly slow movers. So those forests in much part of North America have evolved without native earthworms over the last 10,000 years. But then it really changed when the European farmers began to arrive, and they brought their livestock and the crops with them, and they have earthworms in their cocoons. And then we had expanding and loading activities, and also the beginning of recreation that involves hiking and trails and fishing. So they all contributed to the expansion of the earthworms. So I was kind of beginning to investigate how those earthworms arrived where they are, and not just in Minnesota, but also in other parts of North America, but also in North Europe, where the glacier was also active until 10,000 years ago. And then led me to the point that I might actually do something interesting for IAS. Also, I might be at the point that I can learn from them something that is useful in my project. And that's how I got into IAS. But I have to admit that when I was notified that I was awarded the residential fellowship, I was actually quite surprised. And so while I was at IAS last fall, I spent quite a lot of time going to seminars in IAS and also surrounding department. And I also had, I was really lucky to be next to Helena McCormick, who's a historian, historian of South Africa, but she has incredible kind of capacity to conceptualize the interactions between humans and nature. I was also next to Bill Mosley. He was a geographer from McAllister College, and he was interested in the land use policies in South Africa. So, and I spent quite a lot of time with him. And then one of those days, I became really emotional after listening to them and then some talks. Then I began to realize that people in the humanities and art are really struggling with people, for the people who suffer and the labor, and trying to make their voices heard. So this is the email that I wrote to one of my students who was then traveling in South America for several months. But then when I was reading this email again, then I realized that this was the first time I described how nature impacts humans as human suffering, or how humans affect nature as humans' labor. So I began to realize that I was kind of going to be the far side of the moon. So you may know that the moon is always showing us the one side of its surface, and because of particular geophysical properties of the moon. So we only see people who dwell on Earth can only see the one side of the moon. So if you favor the kind of theory of a UFO and others, that the other side of the moon is only to be seen by aliens. So while I was at IAS, the university was busy structuring grant challenges. And you look at those challenges from your perspective and how I am related to those great grant challenges. And to me, my discipline was kind of the perspective. I see those grant challenges through my disciplinary lens, and in this case, stories. And I felt great because 2 of the 5 seem to be really related to me, and I can see them quite well through the lens of the stories. But then, but as I was kind of beginning to really investigate how earthworms, for example, arrive where they are, and or how agriculture has modified the soils that we try to take care of, then I realized that my discipline doesn't offer much about the rest of, not just the rest of the grand challenges, but also about two of the grand challenges that I felt I was kind of capable of seeing the whole thing. But then, we also know that the far side of the moon is also visible to astronauts if you are lucky enough to go there. So, if I have to summarize, my experience at the IAS, is that I think it was kind of my first opportunity to be on the other side of my disciplines that are kind of interfacing to the humanities and arts and also social sciences. So, where is kind of my IAS experience in this picture? So, when I look at the IAS's vision, IAS describes itself as a site and also a concept, and also what's the last one? A community. So I think IAS for me was a site that gave me a vista from which I can look at the far side of those grand challenges or the far side of the disciplines that I am kind of involved in. And when it comes to the concept, I think I really learned the concept of gravity when I was in IAS. The gravity of the disciplines. The gravity of the disciplines gives me the traction to really go forward, but at the same time, because of the gravity, you're kind of bounded to the sites that you are kind of supposed to see. You are no longer really free to be on the other side of this sphere. And third, it was really community because, as you know, being an astronaut is a risky business. You need a good spacesuit, and you need lifelines, and probably space shuttles, etc., etc. And I think it's a really risky business to be in the other side of the discipline for kind of length of a semester, when you have to kind of prove your kind of disciplinary mastery in every semester and every year. So I felt really grateful that IAS was becoming a community for me to kind of feel safe in this, in being an astronaut at the time. And I can talk a little bit more about that later, but I think my time is up. Thank you.
I actually don't have slides, so I like the idea of having the astronaut running around. So I'm just going to start with two main points about the IAS and me, and that is one that I credit, and it's also a dubious credit, but I credit the IAS with really giving me that space and that freedom to rethink a project that I thought was almost done, but that by the time I finished my semester at the IAS caused me to add about 500 pages to an already big manuscript, but that it was all worth it. So the IAS helped me, rethink my boundaries and really move forward in so many different ways on a project, and I'll get back to that in a little bit. And then the other point that I want to make is that the collaborations that the IAS has helped to make possible on campus may be, one of those paragraphs on the website, but that what you don't see from the website is the afterlives, right? So how those collaborations on campus, across campuses, across institutions, regionally, internationally, go on to seed other programs, other projects that that continue to grow and expand. So the first part is my time as an IAS fellow, and I was thinking about this quite literally as I was walking across the Washington Avenue Bridge, because as you know, the University of Minnesota is so ginormous, and that's a wonderful thing. There's people doing research on every conceivable subject across both campuses, across the systems. There's nothing as exhilarating as realizing that there are other people working in your field. There's nothing as demoralizing as realizing that there are other people working in your field and creating these great projects, that you each are reinventing the wheel on your own, and how wonderful would it have been if you had known that you existed and that you could reinvent the wheel together. So the IAS is one of those places where this happens. It's really one of the few places where this happens. I already think of myself as a pretty interdisciplinary scholar. I have 3 appointments. I'm a professor of history, a professor of Asian American studies, and I direct the Immigration History Research Center. I think it's been months since I've been on the East Bank. I just travel, quite literally within a triangle of the different departments. But as IAS fellows, we are given that freedom, it's such a gift. It really is such a gift to be able to be in another place, to be able to interact and listen to and learn from colleagues that are doing work and conceptualizing projects that in ways that you really hadn't known about before. So when I was an IAS fellow, I think in 2013 or maybe even 2012.
2010.
Oh my gosh, that long ago? 2010.
Yeah, 2010.
I came explicitly to finish a book that I'd been working on for quite some time. An international book that examined the history of Asian exclusion in the Americas, 1850 to World War II. And I really thought, okay, I just need 3 months to knock it out, I'll finish it off. The conversations, and again, that freedom, just that freedom to be there, that I was exposed to during that semester were so just wonderful. And I can't even point to specific people or specific conversations or a specific light bulb moment, but it was just really more of a long, slow simmer that by the time I finished that semester, I realized, I could publish this book. I could publish this book as it is. But there's so much more that I've been thinking about, that I've been exposed to, that I really think that I need to go back 300 years and bring it forward about another 150 years. And so the book that Jennifer just mentioned begins really in the 1400s, and it goes all the way up to today. And it really did make, so on the one hand, thanks a lot, IAS, you write 500 more pages. And not all of it made it into the final book, but it was that kind of, light bulb moment, or just this expansive way that really transformed my thinking, and I think made the end result so much better. The other aspect is the IAS's role in fostering collaborations. I don't know what year, the Hmong Studies collaboration, 2007? Early.
Maybe even earlier than
Maybe
that.
even earlier.
I think
Actually,
actually
was in 2005.
it preceded the IAS.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So,
You were our first thing.
thank you.
That was before me.
Oh, wow. Pre-Susanna history, ancient history. So I guess even before the IAS, but then it was folded into the IAS.
Yeah, it was folded into the IAS. I was a PI on it, and
Yeah.
so I folded everything I was doing into the IAS.
So it's really an and project. But the Hmong Studies Consortium, a loose foundation fellowship that allowed the University of Minnesota to partner with the University of Wisconsin-Madison to fund really an emerging field in Hmong studies that was critical for these 2 campuses and these 2 areas. It funded a few years of a postdoctoral fellowship, an assistant professorship, another postdoctoral fellowship that turned into an assistant professorship, teaching, research collaborations, and as a result, both campuses have strong presences and have gone on to do conferences and publications and so forth. So that I think is the formal collaboration that might make it onto the website at the IAS. But then what didn't make it onto the IAS is that those collaborations helped to then grow other, even larger consortiums. So I'm a historian, but I'm horrible at dates, so I think this must have been 2010. a number of us who work in Asian American Studies across the CIC, our Big 10 universities, received funding from the CIC to establish a consortium in Asian American Studies. So this meant, let me just back up. The reason why this was so important at that time is that the Midwest for Asian American Studies is considered sort of flyover zone. There were programs, long-standing programs, 30, 40 years on the West Coast. The East Coast was the next in the 1980s or 90s. It was, the Midwest and the South are more recent. And so many institutions were realizing that they had finally had a cohort of faculty, staff, and students that they could move forward on establishing a program in Asian American Studies. And the demographics for student and the student services and needs were such that a program made sense. Because of those collaborations and long stays, we knew we could partner with the University of Wisconsin, and we gradually were able to just expand those collaborations across the many different CIC institutions, Illinois, Northwestern, etc. Out of that came a joint graduate seminar, an annual caucus at the Association for Asian American Studies meetings, a junior faculty retreat. We helped establish programs that still exist at other institutions. And then because of that collaboration, more recently, when the Mellon Foundation put out their call for the Humanities Without Walls grant, we were able to simply just get on the phone or send an email to all of those people that we had networked with to ask, would you be interested in joining a research collaboration on the global Midwest? To examine the ways in which new M/migration is transforming America's heartland in ways that help us redefine and rethink why and how people move, and what does America's heartland really mean during this time of intense globalization and global migration. It's because of those long-standing networks that we had established from a tiny seed that steadily grew outward that has made those collaborations work, and that will continue to have lives long after. So that is how the IAS has been important personally and professionally. The thing that I hope that we can continue to do is to not only certainly address the grand challenges, these university-defined challenges that cover a great array of subjects, but that it also remain a space where ideas and projects can emerge organically, so that we don't spend all of our time and energy in the defined for us projects, but also we allow that time for creativity and innovation as well. So thank you very much.
Thanks to all of our panelists. This has been a wonderful presentation of things that have really worked in the last 10 years. In preparing for today, I pulled out my IAS folder and I found what I think is probably the oldest document relating to IAS. It's a proposal from Stephen Rosenstone, the President's Interdisciplinary Initiative on Arts and Humanities, and there were 5 things proposed in this white paper. Only one was actually implemented, I think. That was IAS, and it's clearly worked. I promise I won't spend much time looking back, but this is kind of fun, given the comments that we just listened to. So there were a series of goals laid out for the Institute for Advanced Study: overcoming specialization, overcoming geography, overcoming the lack of funding, fostering creativity and collaboration. And I think with maybe the exception of funding, because people didn't really address that one way or the other, it certainly lived up to all of those expectations. But Jennifer asked us to look forward. And so I guess I'd like to hear, to just get the conversation started from the panelists, what would have made your experience even better, or what would you like to see IAS do in the next 10 years? Where should it go?
I actually have a very specific hope, and that is that the IAS and the Institute on the Environment collaborate more fully. And I know there are conversations about that and things have started to happen, but I do think that that would be a really rich place to go as a next step, especially with the grand challenges.
Anybody else?
To me, IAS was very attractive because of this kind of a long time tradition in humanities and arts. And saying this as a natural scientist may sound odd, but as I was kind of developing my proposal and I was kind of finding the role that the kind of empty pages in my proposal that need to be filled with the contents from the history books and geography books and anthropology books, and I was kind of desperately looking for people who can help me to fill these empty pages. And then that's when I was really reminded of the presence of IAS. So I think there is a great role for IAS, to expand and then trying to address many of the grand challenges from different angles and from different disciplines. But at the same time, as there is a growing number of interdisciplinary centers within the campus, I think that having that identity that is associated with tradition could be also a very important one.
We should throw the discussion open to the floor as well. Thoughts?
Because I know nobody in this audience has
I just saw Alex Rothman come in, and Alex and I were on the committee that sort of worked to create IAS, and I do remember at one point saying to Stephen that this should really be kind of a spa for faculty. Everything should be taken care of so that you could get your work done, explore explore ideas. And I was quickly told, don't let that get out.
Susan. I like the idea of more collaboration, because I think centers and institutes is where some of the most interesting work goes on campus. And I think, as was well illustrated, I think that's where people can really find both people who are doing something similar to what they're doing and they didn't know about them, or people who are doing something very differently. And I say this as the current director of Center for Bioethics, I have reached out to Jennifer to say, let's collaborate, because nobody knows about Center for Bioethics on this side of Washington, and I really want to end that invisibility. And IAS is the first institute I turn to say, let's collaborate, and let's do something that can really, be a wonderful relationship. And that's, I just wanted to emphasize that I think that's a very good idea, because centers, even as centers and hubs of really vital activity, can themselves feel a little isolated after a while.
Naomi.
I'd like to continue along the same lines with another connection, and that's ICGC, Interdisciplinary Center for the Study of Global Change. And part of what I find exciting about that, aside from the fact that it and IAS are both extraordinarily wonderful places, is rethinking issues around the sort of the global, or the problematic contrast between local and the global, and sort of taking that apart and thinking in terms that I think are deeply woven into the DNA of both IAS and ICGC, and that's the E.M. Forster term, only connect. That moving away from what so many of us are taught in our disciplines, which is to generalize. That is, the way you go beyond the local is you generalize, you find similarities, you abstract, and to note that maybe there's useful things about that, but there's this other thing of doing, which is connect. On whom are we dependent? To whom are we vulnerable? Who's vulnerable to us? Who's affected by what we do? And think about those things, the materiality of connection. Think about the river, think about the history of this land, think about how we're related to, people and places elsewhere and so on. And I think that sense of pay attention to where you are, but then how where you are is connected through time and space materially to other places is so much part of the ethos of this place and part of what makes it so special. And I think making sure that that way of thinking and that notion of responsibility is woven throughout all of the work of the grand challenges, I think is something that IAS can help to do.
There's a synthesis. Things come together, they go apart, and they come together, and they go apart. So, all the lonely people that are working on these lonely things, then they need to come together and collaborate.
One thing that I was struck by as I listened to the comments of the panel of the panelists is the way in which IAS has sort of, it's so well positioned to address the grand challenges. You've already been working this way for 10 years, and so it's you've created, in IAS, there's been a set of practices that have been created that are particularly well suited to addressing the grand challenges. But there's also been this sort of freedom and safety. I think that word was used by a couple people on the panel in IAS, and the sense that it's okay to have the conversation, but you don't necessarily need to produce anything. And I wonder, how the way the grand challenges have been framed, whether that creates a challenge for this kind of space.
Can I just because I feel awkward about this, I totally dislike the phrasing, don't have to produce anything. The collaboratives I ran resulted in several co-authored publications, some edited publications. Someone who attended one of the collaboratives credits attendance at the Christian one, starting his medical humanities journal. There's a ton of productivity that comes out of this, and so I want to make sure to kill the impression that we get a semester where we don't have to produce something. Instead, we have a semester to explore, and given the freedom to explore, we produce an awful lot. So, sorry to be weird, but... I'm not even sure that this thing is doing anything at this point.
Yeah, but it's fun to hold, isn't it? And I think I'm the one who said didn't have to produce anything, so forgive me, because you're right. There were so many things that came after even the collaboration technically ended. There were, for us, there was a course that was created that's still happening at the Humphrey right now. We could all probably name those things. I think one of the things that I've struggled with under sort of the engagement rubric is that as engaged scholars, the thing we haven't been able to convince people of is that building the partnerships is part of the scholarly process. People think that just happens like magic, and then we have partnerships, and then we go and we do the research. That's not the way it happens, and I think this is the same argument, that all this time that we have to actually explore is part of the scholarly process, or part of the process that an academic should be participating in. And I think that's what I meant when I said we have so few spaces created for people to think. And that should, I thought that's what being an academic was about. And so I think that was what I really learned about participating in the collaboration. And what all of the people that I worked with, it really took us a long time to calm down and say, this is productive. This is what we should be doing, and something will come out of that.
I just want to make one other comment about this, about productivity or non-productivity.
It's like a talking stick.
Something made out of like driftwood or something. But I also just want to emphasize, like, actually how the IAS, and I know my participation in it, has really been transformative. So it's not just about production or even a space to think, but I'm really not overstating the fact that I really do think that the way we at the IAS honor different ways of knowing has infiltrated the university. And this idea that you don't have to be within your narrow discipline, but you can move outside and have meaningful conversations and be influenced by each other. You know, so I mean, I do think things came out that are very concrete. And I know I named them because so often the arts, you know, it's about an experience. And I fully, you know, appreciate experiences that are transformative. But I also think there are a number of concrete transformations that I can name that have happened at the university, and I really do, I hope there are people out there that are listening to me that can really credit the IAS for making those things happen.
We'll see that the video this gets to the right place.
I was just thinking about the call to think. Hello. I was just thinking about the call to think about the future of the IAS that you're saying, and also thinking about what you were saying about public engagement, and Chris, what you were saying about the transformative impact of the IAS on the art department. Erica's 500 pages, David's publications. The fact that we have a soil scientist in the room who appreciates the very specific nature of the humanities, for me is a transformative event in and of itself, coming from a deep, deep humanistic background. But I think also, thinking about all this productivity, I'm really admirative of the way the IAS has had to strike this very delicate balance between making itself known and seen in the eyes of an administration that has certain really concrete, grand, challenging goals, and appealing to a faculty and public with a lot of other ideas. And one of the results, I think, has been that incredible transformative impact on what we think of as our scholarship. As you said, public engagement is being part of what we do. I think looking forward, I'd like to see the IAS be as experimentally responsive, which sounds weird, as responsibly experimental, if you will, to opening up what research, what engagement, what productivity means. And I'm not even sure really what I mean, but I know that 17 years ago when I started at the IAS, I would not consider a lot of this part of my job or part of the purview of a research university. And I'm so glad at what's happened over the past decade and a half. And I think there's a lot more to be done as well. And I don't exactly know what the call would be, but it seems like the IAS is perfectly positioned to really change where we can do that work. And I just wonder what those experiments would be like, how the IAS could actually help faculty, community organizations, public, maybe the administration, think about experimentation in these areas. And I don't know if anybody had any thoughts about that, or people who've long been a part of the IAS have thought about that.
The piece that I'm really interested in that connects the questions that you're raising and the point that Naomi and Susan were making about the centers is that is the curriculum piece. And IAS was the host for what became the Religious Studies program, which is a major and minor, undergraduate major and minor program, which is interdepartmental and interdisciplinary. And my question then, as we think about these things, is the curricular piece. As faculties ideas, thoughts about how to do scholarship is changing, bringing in public engagement. Can IAS go farther with the curriculum piece? I'm thrilled to see Susanna's class here, a seminar that has been connected with IAS for several years now. Are there ways in which, as faculty thinking changes through interdisciplinary work, can that affect the way the college, the way the university thinks about interdisciplinary work, like centers like the Asian American Studies program or the Religious Studies program, which very honestly both run up against all sorts of obstacles in trying to just maintain an interdepartmental or an interdisciplinary perspective. So curriculum is one piece that I would add to this question.
Over the years, often when when there was something curricular that made sense for IAS to do based on, I don't know, a speaker who was coming in, or Anne would call up and say, can we do this with IGS? And and it worked. And I'd say yes, and it worked really well. I mean, those were kind of one-off courses, but I think there are ways for those partnerships to allow for that to happen. I mean, I think it happens with initially. I think IGS was the go-to place for those. Not everything makes sense to put in IGS, obviously, and so it's broadened. But I think that's been one way that IAS has impacted the curriculum.
Thank you. Well, and I just would like to think further about how the Grand Challenges curriculum, which is an initiative that is being supported, could interface with the IAS. And I know I have a proposal in with my two co-teachers who are both at CFANS for the climate change class. But it is a rare opportunity as a faculty member to get funded to co-teach a class. It's been a rare thing, and Grand Challenges has allowed us to do that. But IAS was the original model for me for trying to figure out how to do that. And so I just wonder, sometimes these initiatives, I don't know how fragile or not they are, but I know it's, difficult to create a new curriculum. I see Alex nodding in the background there, because it's like a new designation. But I do wonder about that interface, and I don't know what's possible, but I think it would be worth some conversations, because I think IAS has figured so much out about how to work collaboratively with faculty to create classes.
Well, there's the collaborate with faculty to create classes, and then there's how does it count for students? Just thought I'd throw that in.
I was just going to say that while I was at IAS, I was really struck by the idea of having interdisciplinarity in outreach activities, because I've been always thinking about interdisciplinary research, but then I never really thought about having interdisciplinary approach in terms of outreach. And then that has to do with grand challenge issue of enhancing individual and community capacity for a changing world. And then I was sitting on several of the workshops that are intended to empower community activities. And then the people who are participating in those workshops are getting a lot of different perspectives from the experts who have different backgrounds. So they were kind of being empowered by this interdisciplinary knowledge of the issue. But then I thought that maybe if such interdisciplinary knowledge about one issue can empower people who are involved in those issues, that might be also true for our faculties too. For example, I think we really value the kind of knowing everything about one thing, but at the same time we are terribly frustrated by the impossibility of doing it. So when we really know, when you talk about the value of knowing everything about one thing, I can imagine my colleagues and students who are so much fall in love with the soils, such that they really desire to know everything about the soils, whether that's physics, or whether that's chemistry, or whether that's geography or anthropologist, and they like to know everything. And then such kind of affection of the study object, that really empowers those students, and that's also true for us as well. But at the same time, when you try to do that, you're also kind of having a humbling experience that such one object doesn't really allow you to know everything. So you kind of begin to notice many kind of aspects of this object that you are just not really equipped to really touch. So you come to the help of others. So by doing so, you kind of see, find the communities who you didn't really recognize before. So I think, when we try to develop, kind of some very perfect knowledge about one thing, what we often find is that we ended up empowering ourselves, but at the same time, we ended up really respecting the community, or also sometimes build the communities around it. So I think there is a tendency to kind of the breaking down the studying of the object to disciplines, but at the same time there could be some counterpart that that kind of helps the students to learn the object as a one whole entity, and I think that there could be one approach of kind of revising the curriculum. I don't know whether this really adds to conversation, but.
Susanna?
I was just wondering if I was picking up on a slight tension between the way that the grand challenges is sort of shaping some of the direction of IAS and the desire to maintain that sense of the accidental intellectual adventure that I certainly cherish from my time on the SFL. Kind of sitting at the table and saying, what do we have in common? How do we talk to each other? How do we create that vocabulary? And if instead the IAS is pressured in some sense to respond to questions that have already been addressed, and if that's the group that in the future will continuously meet, then are we losing something that's really special? That I think everybody has picked up on in the panel as their non-quantifiable experience, non-measurable.
I feel like the IAS, in the way that it's currently structured, flexes to that, right? Which is to say that if you want to set up a collaborative, you have to know who your partners are. You have to have some sense of what you're going to do with each other, right? And if in mapping out the future of a collaborative, that's already a fairly structured experience, right? And whether it's structured in a way that meets the grand challenges or not, that's kind of a question that I can get a little squishy on. But that's never been, to me, as much the realm of serendipity as much as the Fellows program has been.
Well, I'm talking particularly about the Fellows program.
But I guess what I'm suggesting is that because the IAS has multiple programs, that in fact it's already capable of flexing to these pressures in a way that I think makes me feel okay.
And I think that's what I was trying to get at in my closing comments, is that I know that just looking at all of the bubbles that are part of the grand challenges, there seems to be something for everyone. However, and I haven't been part of the planning committee, and I'm not on the IAS board, so I don't know, what the pressure is, if there is any. But just simply as a faculty member, I do feel like the grand challenges are kind of overtaking our lives, both curricularly, research-wise, the types of engagement that is being rewarded. Not that, again, not that they're large and not that they're so narrow that you can't find a way to work within them, but it does make me a little concerned for whenever we do flex towards or, you know, mold ourselves to certain prerogatives, how the accidental and the just organic collaborations or ideas might get a little lost. So that's, I think it's just something to be thinking about in the future.
Yeah, well, I was on the Grand Challenges team, and when we talk about how horrible their effect has been, it's important to remember they were announced 3 weeks ago. I mean, and the Grand Challenges curriculum preceded the Grand Challenges research. And I think it was never the intention of the university to say this and only this is what we're interested in. I think the idea was to pull people together and say, okay, we have all this really cool stuff. What are some of the piles we can put it in so we can articulate to ourselves, to the legislature, and to the public what it is we're doing. And I think if we start feeling pressured to do things we don't want to do, it is our job to resist that pressure. You know, and if we cave to that pressure, shame on us.
And Grand Challenges could really be an opportunity for IAS. And if we see it as something, as a pressure instead of an opportunity, that's the other way I like to think about it. Because it could actually create alliances between centers that maybe we hadn't had thought about before. But I agree with you, Ann. I think it's a choice. And the other part is I don't think I don't know that there are going to be a lot of resources attached to the
I don't think anyone has announced a penny yet in terms of resources.
Right. But the idea is there, does it offer an opportunity?
Classes do have resources.
But,
yeah, but.
Jennifer,
Do I get the last one?
Yeah, you get the last one.
So I partly framed this in terms of the Grand Challenges because I wanted to point out that in fact the IAS has been working on what are now the anointed Grand Challenges voluntarily, organically, etc. for the last decade. And because I do think that it is important that we do look at research that is organically evolved and that goes across every discipline and time period and place in the university's research as having potential relevance or whatever to the Grand Challenges, because the Grand Challenges are not a single question. I think it's our job to evolve what are the significant questions and how does our work relate to it. And to Juliet's point, so I'm so glad she came because I knew she would say something I wanted to hear, which is that I think that those questions about what does it mean to do research, what is productivity, what does it mean to meaningfully collaborate, and what does it mean to be interdisciplinary in the, you know, in the 21st century and especially in a public institution is very important. And we have a lot of structures that mitigate against those kinds of things, and that the IAS has evolved in certain ways to overcome the structural barriers, or that's probably too strong a word. But you know, I hope that we will see this in the fullest and kind of organic way, and not, I don't feel any particular pressure to be framed by the Grand Challenges, but, so this is really the final word. Everything that everybody has said and brought to this table today is what the IAS is, because the IAS is not an entity, it is all the people who come into the space. And so all of you have made the IAS what it has accomplished in the last 10 years. It was the faculty's ideas, it was the community partners' ideas, and that's the part I think is the most important for us to take forward, is that it is what everybody brings themselves into the space. So thank you all, and I hope we can thank our panelists and reconvene in Nolte for a little less formal celebration and more conversation.